sir?
The ball. How
Good.
about you?
Good. Yes. Michael, you doing all right, sir? I call the Charlottesville City Council meeting to order, the January 20th, 2026 meeting to order. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilor Fleischer,
Here.
Vice Mayor Oshran,
Here.
Councilor Payne,
Here.
Councilor Snook,
Here.
Mayor Wade.
Here. Is there a motion to approve or amend the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second to,
Yeah, second.
okay? All in favor, please say yes.
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 All opposed, please say no. The meeting will be divided into three sections. The first one will be a work session where we hear and discuss presentations that do not require a council vote, followed by a closed session, and then the city council will have its regular business meeting at 6:30. Today will be, the work session will be solely dedicated to discussion on student housing. And Ms. Brown, will you start us off, or?
So as Ms. Brown comes forward, just want to begin this conversation with pointing out to the public specifically as a reminder that council requested this particular conversation on student housing for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of work still to be done as the zoning ordinance was adopted. It was adopted with the notion that there would be things that we would have to go back and take a look at. So we'll continue to talk about that in prior conversations. Ms. Brown has brought forward a work plan and shared with you an organization of that particular work and how we plan to attack it. There have also been expressions of concerns and requests that this is all a part of feeding that particular deliberation. And we as staff are looking for any new steps, any guidance that you all will give and how we will manage or order our steps for going forward. But again, the work plan exists, so Ms. Brown is planning to work with her team on delivering that, and we'll make edits as you give that advice. So I'll turn it over to her and allow her to take us through what she has prepared for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Brown. I am the Director of Neighborhood Development Services here for the city. And in light of Council's interest in the topic of student housing, I'm here to provide you with an overview of the scope of work for an annual review of the Affordable Dwelling Unit Manual that governs the delivery of affordable units with development here in the city. And this study will focus on policies and requirements this year for in lieu fees for housing, including student housing. So am I allowed to advance? Am I allowed to advance, or?
Yeah, you just got to, yeah, there you go.
okay.
You just got to get the right angle, so, yes.
Great. Okay. So, the Affordable Dwelling Unit Monitoring and Procedures Manual, or AD Manual as we refer to it, must be updated on an annual basis. Staff has developed background information and a scope of work for this study, including a community engagement process and timeline. And today we are hoping to get feedback from City Council on the scope of work of this effort to inform the approach. Staff will return with updates after research and community engagement on this effort. So as I talk about the study today, I want to provide a little bit of background information on student housing and start with some history of student housing here in the city. As we know, UVA enrollment growth has steadily increased demand for student housing here in the city. Historically, students lived on grounds, but only in a limited capacity, and also in older apartment complexes near UVA and in converted single-family homes in neighborhoods adjacent to the university. As enrollment grew and has been growing over time, private developers have started to increasingly step in to build purpose-built student housing. This housing is located within walking distance to grounds and is trending toward larger 4-bedroom units and a rental by the bedroom. Also able to provide a high-level overview of some of the market factors that are influencing student housing. So the university enrollment is currently at 27,000 students, according to the University of Virginia website. Approximately 7,000 beds on grounds, so about 4,000 for first years, and the balance is for other students and graduate students. And the 2030 plan for the university aspires to house all first year and second year students. Currently, there are a number of projects under construction off grounds totaling about 3,500 beds. So all told, this means that about 17,000 students will continue to find housing off grounds and in the city and in the county moving forward. From a national perspective, the development of private student housing is a national phenomenon as enrollment grows at universities across the country and student preferences evolve. So from a national report that has been produced on this topic, we are seeing private bedrooms and bathrooms, higher-end amenities, mixed-use concepts near campus, within walking distance to campus, and again, a preference for private space and modern amenities. So there's obviously 2 examples here from Charlottesville, but also an example from Greensboro. And doing some additional research today, came across a report on a project being constructed in Blacksburg for delivery in 2028, which won't help my son if he ends up going there, but that's okay. It's a short walk from Virginia Tech campus. Planned to house 8 stories, 247 units, 862 beds. So this is a phenomenon we're seeing across the country. Let's see. Also, some background on the development code. So as you are all aware, the new development code was adopted in 2023. It includes residential districts, mixed-use districts, industrial districts, and special districts. The zoning map and the development code also includes the locations and regulations for overlay districts where special requirements apply. A key detail that I just want to emphasize this afternoon is that housing is allowed in all these districts by right. There are no restrictions on where student housing can be built, nor is it defined as a distinct use. There is not a special overlay district for student housing. The concept of student housing really only comes into play with regards to requirements for affordable housing. So for residential development, and this is laid out in the ADU manual, projects with more than 10 units must provide 10% of the units at less than 60% AMI or pay an in lieu fee. Bonus height is allowed, it is achievable for projects when the units are delivered at less than 50% of the AMI, or they can pay the same in lieu fee as required for units delivered at 60% of AMI. The in lieu fee for residential construction is equal to the average total cost per unit of developing a residential unit in the Charlottesville market based on a bedroom count up to 3 bedrooms. For student housing, and this is really the only way that student housing is referred to in the zoning ordinance, student housing is projects that are rented by the bedroom within a half mile of campus grounds, and for student housing, no on-site affordable units are required. Bonus height may be realized, and an in lieu fee is required. And the in lieu fee is calculated differently as the difference between the value of a market rate unit and that of an affordable unit, otherwise known as the value gap, and that's based on a bedroom count up to 3 bedrooms.
Quick question, just to clarify. So you mentioned this is where the term student housing is used in the ordinance, and then these are the definitions for it. But it doesn't mean that, and there's not a legal way for landlords to say you have to be a student to live here, right?
That's right. That's correct. That's not something that is defined in our ordinance or something that.
So it's geared towards students, but legally can be open to anybody?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of the rationale for why the requirements are different for student housing, the basis for this distinction was the understanding that student housing projects do not typically include non-student housing, and thus there should be no requirement for on-site units. And then given that no on-site units would be required, a lower in-lieu fee for student housing than for non-student housing seemed appropriate. And since the value gap was calculated at a lower basis than the construction cost, that was why a different in-lieu fee expectation was established for student housing than for non-student housing. So this requirement translates into a geographic impact where the in-lieu fee is different for student housing. Again, it's only available for projects that run by the bedroom and located within proximity of the University of Virginia. The zoning administrator has the final authority to determine if a project is within proximity, that is 1/2 mile of the university, with measurement being in a direct line from the edge of the main campus areas, central grounds and north grounds, to the edge of the subject parcel. And outlying university-owned parcels are not considered part of the campus for the purpose of this ordinance. So this map here on the left, which is a little hard to read, but it indicates the locations of north grounds and central grounds, essentially the areas that do not have city zoning, and then what a 1/2 mile radius around those areas looks like. So as we sought to develop a scope of work for this study, we did identify some preliminary concerns, and these are also things that we have heard in the community as well. First of all, as it relates to residential development non-student housing, the in-lieu fee payment structure is only applying to projects that have a requirement of 60% AMI. There is no different expectation for those projects that are seeking to achieve bonus height. In terms of student housing specifically, there's a lack of a requirement for on-site units, and this limits new affordable housing where student housing is the most financially feasible reinvestment option. There's also a concern that with a lower per bedroom cost requirement for student housing, there could be a greater incentive to produce student housing within that area closer to the university. There's no consideration for conversions to non-student housing, no consideration for 4-bedroom units, and the large geography that applies this policy impacts neighborhoods where displacement is a concern.
Ms. Brown, could I ask you a question? I'm just curious about something on that slide, and the same slide or the same graph or chart appears on page 14. It looks like the cost per ownership condominium unit for student housing for a 2-bedroom apartment, that must be a mistake. It can't, I wouldn't think it would be lower than the 1-bedroom.
That's something we can look into
Yeah.
more closely. Thanks
That
for
doesn't matter for any of our deliberations today, but I think.
Yeah, that's something to look at. So given this background and concerns such as the one that has been raised, staff has tailored a study to try to address the concerns with the current approach to in-lieu fee expectations. But first, before I get into those key questions, I did just want to provide a little bit more background as the manager referred to our work plan and our approach to studying and developing recommendations for development code amendments. So staff has come to you a number of times to talk through our approach to looking at changes to the development code in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Staff is preparing to finalize a suite of amendments, over 30 amendments in the Tier 1 and Tier 2 category to bring forward for your consideration next month. The Tier 3 amendments have been defined as those that really represent much larger policy questions that require more in-depth analysis and engagement. And this review of the AD manual, given the questions that are posed about student housing policy, it really does represent a Tier 3 study that we have actually added to our work plan mid-year with the transition of housing to NDS, but we have done so because we recognize the concerns that are raised about the approach to student housing and the importance of in-depth analysis and community engagement to best inform potential staff recommendations and council action. So the key questions we are posing in this study really fall into two categories. First, what is some background research and analysis that staff needs to do to try to understand potential options we could consider? First of all, do the current in lieu fee payment structures accurately reflect construction costs for non-student housing and the value gap for student housing? Do those figures need to be updated to reflect current understanding of those costs and those revenue differentials for student housing and non-student housing? What are the approaches of other Virginia jurisdictions? We've actually, just in doing some additional research, come across an interesting approach in Minneapolis to student housing. Is that something that can be applied here? Using the financial model that we created for the tax abatement study, and which staff is looking forward to bringing to you as part of a separate discussion at some time in the near future, what approach to requirements for in lieu fee payments really provide that best balance of incentivizing production of on-site units without limiting development feasibility? The second category of questions that we would like to study through this process fall into the realm of refining and clarifying the city's goals and guiding principles for student housing. So what is it that the city is trying to achieve in the administration of in lieu fee requirements? What are the city's goals for student housing? What should the relationship be between expectations for student housing and non-student housing? Should in lieu fee payments be greater for bonus height than for non-bonus height? So these are all questions that we are hoping to address through the study to inform recommendations moving forward. And given the importance of really working with the community to understand some of these aspects, we have developed a approach to community engagement. We would like to connect with a number of different stakeholder groups and have already started to do so. Key commissions and committees that advise City Council, property owners, UVA, Albemarle County, the TJPDC, and a number of advocacy organizations are all groups that we would like to get their feedback on moving forward. We are doing presentations for commissions and Q&A sessions. Happy to report that we have a Connect Charlottesville presence for this study. If you just Google Connect Charlottesville and student housing, it will take you to a new webpage all about the city's housing policy and production programs, where you can provide some feedback on these key questions to help inform the study goals and guiding principles. We will do focus groups and also pop-up visits to try to get feedback. And these really do reflect the two broad, big picture questions we want to try to get answers to help inform us moving forward. You know, what is the most important outcome of this policy? What should it accomplish for the community? And what are impacts or unintended consequences that we should work hard to try to prevent? So there is, some, based on those concerns that I presented earlier, staff is looking to try to understand if there are some potential options that we might want to test moving forward. So something that we could consider would be the creation of an in lieu fee payment structure that increases the requirement for bonus height to reflect that the on-site requirement for bonus height is 50% of AMI, not 60% of AMI. With regards to student housing specifically, we could consider requiring on-site units for student housing. This is actually something that Minneapolis requires, and there are affordable units being produced as part of those developments. Or if those on-site units cannot be produced, allow an in lieu fee equivalent to the requirement for non-student housing. This would address the potential conversions to non-student housing, and it would also allow for on-site units when the financial and market conditions are favorable to that. Adding an in lieu fee requirement for 4-bedroom units seems appropriate, given that that is being delivered in the market, and certainly considering the geographic criteria. If that is still needed, given the potential merit of having equivalent expectations for non-student housing and student housing, or if there is a different reason for maintaining a geographic criteria. And this could certainly remove some of that potential incentive to build student housing if that's not desired. And then for all housing projects, something that we would like to continue to study moving forward, and again, it plays into the tax abatement study that we're looking forward to speaking with you more about, is the potential for tax abatement strategies to offset the cost associated with affordable housing production and facilitate investment to be further explored. So before I wrap up, just wanted to present our timeline. We are in this moment doing some of that background research and evaluation to answer those key questions about whether the fees that are currently required are in line with market conditions, if any adjustments would be appropriate, and then again, that question of feasibility and what is the best balance of incentivizing production and supporting development feasibility. We are looking to do engagement through February, and then hoping that we can develop guiding principles and policy recommendations and potential recommended manual updates and development code amendments, if appropriate, in the spring of this year for your review and consideration. So I believe that brings me to the end, and happy to get your feedback moving forward.
So it's a lot of information. So, Jen, are you ready? I'm sorry. No. You want some more time
I would
to
love
kind
some
of
more
gather
time,
you?
yeah.
Lloyd?
The question that intrigues me, and I'm not sure I know how to think about it, and maybe you with your planning expertise may have some thoughts in this manner. You pose the question of what should our goal be for student housing? And the way I think about it is that, I mean, there are a couple of goals, but really what we're looking for is effects. And one of the effects, it seems to me, would be to have enough density of student housing so that some of the benefits like transit systems and so on become more realizable. One of the other goals ought to be to have the market for student housing be generally in some sort of equilibrium, where there is not such a pressure for and such a scarcity of student available housing, whether it's a student housing per se or just housing near the university. No, there's not such a pressure there that it ends up raising everybody else's rents, including the people who are not students at the university. And I don't know exactly how I want to think about that problem. I don't know what factors I would look at to say, this is what a market in equilibrium would look like. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about it now purely in the economic market kind of a sense. Do you know whether there are models for such things that we ought to be looking at and trying to say, okay, that's a place where they've got it figured out?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can really only look at the numbers, that we have seen and that I've shared with you today, that there seems to be a significant imbalance between the supply and demand of student housing. And I think that is one factor that could inform how this community wants to think about student housing. But I would say this is why community engagement on this topic is important, because I think there's a number of different ways you could think about, what the right answer is, and it's good to hear from the community what they value, what they think are the right moves.
I mean, when we had the zoning amendments and so on we were considering a couple of years ago, we had a fairly detailed economic study, a couple of economic studies built into that in ways that I had not even thought of being able to measure, but for example, a rate of change analysis and some other kinds of things where they were coming up. And in fact, some of the figures that lead to the amounts of the in lieu fees were the basis of some of these sorts of studies. Are there folks out there, I mean, should we be going back to the same folks we talked to a couple of years ago to say, what are the new tools that people are using in terms of gauging the market? I'm just trying to figure out how we can begin to know whether we're approaching the problem correctly. Other than we look back in the past and say, whoops, screwed that one up.
I mean, again, I think I go back to just the basic math, right? There's 17,000 students that can't live on grounds. And so they're living either in the city or in the county. They can continue to live where they're living, or, I think it's a policy decision for council. Do you want to be promoting the production of additional student housing to support those units through your policies or not? I don't think I mean, in some ways, I don't know if more complicated analysis of the market is needed. I think we have the information that could help guide us, and then with information from the community, you would be more informed.
Do you know how many units there are that are, let's say, within a walking distance of the university in the private market?
Don't have that information at my fingertips, no.
That's the sort of thing that might be helpful to understand the magnitude of the problem.
If I could just briefly, James Reese, Deputy City Manager, I know one of the challenges in getting to the number of units is that students occupy a range of units, and they will go into the non-student market, if you will, where there isn't student housing available. So what we've done in the past, and I know you've seen this data before, and we can readily get additional data on, is just identifying where students live, right, and use that as a proxy for the amount of student housing across different neighborhoods and buildings within the city.
Well, I remember, 10, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, I guess, when the buildings that everybody loves to hate on West Main Street were built, the observation was made that it seemed that one of the consequences of that was that a lot of students who had been living in, let's say, the 10th and Page neighborhood, the Fifield neighborhood, seemed to have moved into these sorts of units, into these sorts of buildings, and there seemed to be some freeing up of some of that housing that families were able to move into, and they were able to observe, for example, that the number of elementary school students rose in the schools that served those neighborhoods. We're told that this time around, if that same kind of thing were to happen, that we should not expect to see that happen again, because there are just not as many students now living in 10th and Page as there had been comparably 15 years ago. Do we have any way of knowing whether that observation is in fact true?
Sorry, the observation that
we probably would not have the same effect on the neighborhoods this time as we did 15 years ago by building the standard and the flats and so on.
Or an addition to that would be, or what neighborhoods would it be affecting?
Yeah.
I think it's hard to predict the future. It's hard to predict. I think Charlottesville is a very desirable community, so I think you're always going to have residents that want to live in these communities, whether or not they have children. I don't know why you wouldn't expect there to be families with children wanting to live in Charlottesville neighborhoods. So.
I mean, it may be that the kind of analysis that Mr. Freeze was mentioning might be updated. I don't know. I remember having some discussions a couple of years ago about some of the difficulties inherent in that. You have to make certain assumptions and
Right.
and so on, but it's probably better than nothing.
Right. I mean, just anecdotally, what I'm hearing is an anticipation that as more student housing comes into the marketplace, students are going to move out of the older apartments and other kind of residential units that have been previously used as student housing, and we see that bear out in some of the developments. The Cavalier Court one, which is technically located in the county, but that was built, purpose-built as student housing, 4 bedrooms, rented by the room, and it transformed into non-student housing over a relatively short period of time. Again, anecdotally, and talking to people in the marketplace here in Charlottesville, what they're seeing is as the city has allowed a greater density of student housing close to the university, the farther away apartment buildings and so on have transferred to being fewer and fewer students living in those. Students want to be able to walk to campus is fundamentally what we're understanding, and the more opportunities that are given to them closer to campus, the more they take up those opportunities.
Michael, you,
Yeah, well, obviously it's a big topic with a lot involved in it. And no matter what decisions we do or don't make, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and we're never going to have full control over what the market does. That said, I'll try to be as brief and coherent as I can, kind of starting at the level of community conversation and then getting into some of my thoughts about what next steps could be. But I would say, my primary concern is, one community conversation is the concern around height. And I don't think that is nothing. I do think the built environment can express whose voice mattered. You can see that in wealthy neighborhoods with large single-family homes and large lots that didn't allow duplexes and basement apartments. You can see it on 11 stories of student housing that overlooks our largest public housing site. I do think the built environment can segregate neighborhoods and turn public spaces into de facto private ones. But much, much, much more important than that, I'm concerned with the economic impact of these projects in 10th and Page, Fifeville, and Rose Hill. And to me, our primary goal should be trying to stop displacement and economic harm done in those core neighborhoods. And as I look at it, whether we like it or not, students are going to be in Charlottesville. They're going to be part of our market. They're going to need housing. There's going to have to be areas in the city where student housing is built, including large student housing. My concern is that we've de facto targeted large sections of 10th and Page, Fifeville, and Rose Hill, where student housing is the highest and best use. And I think there's a lot of data and research that if you significantly upzone within or right next to working class neighborhoods, you can fuel displacement within that neighborhood while increasing housing options regionally for people who are wealthier, young professionals. And my concern is we've landed on a situation where we're going to inflate the value of land in these neighborhoods and will increase speculative investment. That will create tax pressure for homeowners, but also renters who are going to have no control over building wealth or deciding what to do with their home. They're going to be most at risk. And the other is I do think these, you're talking about 11 stories of student housing going into these neighborhoods. There's going to be agglomeration effects and amenity effects where investors are going to say, there's a ton of students there. Let's make every business catered towards student preferences, because that'll be the highest and best use. I also worry that investors will have auxiliary uses related to UVA, like Airbnbs for sports games, graduation, and that will just push out longtime residents there and they won't benefit. And I also think, I greatly worry that all of this is occurring in the context of the history of urban renewal, the history of institutional racism, the racial wealth gaps in our city. And I just don't see how we can ignore that context in thinking about, we're really foreclosing the ability to get a lot more intentional about doing something like creating a black-owned business district in parts of West Main Street. Or, I know this is a broader conversation, but as one instructive example, the 7th Street project, that's going to be a 5-minute walk from Cherry Avenue. I think as night follows day, once that gets built, Cherry Avenue will transform into an area of by and for UVA students. And we will completely lose our ability to have a black-owned business district there and build community wealth. And That, to me, is my biggest concern. And those risks don't exist if we're looking at JPA, Ivy Road, Barracks, other areas of the city. And one argument is, okay, maybe that risk exists, but if we allow this to get built, prices will collapse so much that housing options will reach everyone. And again, the concern I have is, you know, what new market rate development can do is slow the annual rate at which rents increase. It can't collapse rents and prices because the market's going to regulate itself. And I'm going to quote directly from the affordable housing strategy that was adopted and developed by the team who worked on our zoning. Quote, increasing the supply of housing can limit the increase in rent or housing costs, but typically will not drive rents lower, due largely to the cost of development and premium on rent for new construction. Increasing the development allowable by right makes land more valuable and attractive to investors. This can cause displacement pressures, particularly in neighborhoods with a high percentage of renters. Upzoning must therefore be undertaken primarily in areas where these pressures will be limited. I think we've missed that mark. And we also just haven't implemented displacement strategies yet in terms of targeting increased tax revenue into these neighborhoods, having any form of renter protections, any form of, you know, kind of smart targeted rent control. So when these changes happen there, if, you know, 5 years later we implement those anti-displacement strategies, it's too late. So that's that's big picture, but in terms of kind of where should we go, I think at a minimum, putting this issue into that tier 1 part of the work plan with the main focus being trying to prevent displacement within these neighborhoods of 10th and Page, Fifeville, and Rose Hill is a bare minimum. I also think we need to begin a process of a zoning text amendment that is looking at expanding the core neighborhood overlay into areas within those neighborhoods as well as adjacent to public housing. And within that as well, within our core neighborhood overlay, return Board of Architectural Review authority to what it was under the old zoning just within that area. Because I think we can't just kick this decision to staff and have it go through endless studies, because at the end of the day, this is a decision for City Council to make. There's never going to be a perfect technocratic answer that we can kind of try to defer staff to try to remove the heat from ourselves. I think at the end of the day, we as City Council just have to decide, do we view 7 to 11 stories of student housing in those neighborhoods as a good policy that we want to continue, or is it a problem we want to address? And I'll just end by saying I am just very deeply concerned when you look, we know the data on the median black individual in Charlottesville makes half the income as the median white individual. In these neighborhoods where now we're targeting student housing, the life expectancy is 10 years lower than in our wealthy white neighborhoods. 10 years. Obviously, that speaks to a deep rot in how we've made economic development and planning decisions for decades. But to address that, I think is going to require very creative, ambitious, and intentional community wealth building strategies, and we are going to lose our ability to do that if we have a very simplistic strategy of just 11 stories of student housing in all these areas. It'll trickle down. It won't. But I think we can walk and chew gum as a community and make those changes while also still allowing that level of intensity of student housing development, again, in JPA, Ivy, Barracks. So, thank you.
Natalie?
Yeah, thank you. One of the reasons why I asked earlier about the term student housing is because I think it is not as useful as a more general term. It makes people think that only students are allowed to live in these buildings when it could be hospital employees or anyone else who needs something like this. So I would think that, or I would make a suggestion, and this could be part of the like verbiage section of the Tier 1 projects that we're working on now, that we somehow change that title as we move forward so that it doesn't seem as specific or as limited, even if it is neighborhoods that are closest to the university. There's a lot of staff and faculty and support teams or visiting nurses or whatever that might also be needing this type of housing. And I think that would help kind of clear up some of that, that limitation. I've got some small things and some big things. A kind of smaller thing, but not unimportant, is if you look back to the slide where you had the examples of the Verve, the Bloom, and the Jolly Roger. One of the things that Michael touched on was design. And it's more important for somebody to have shelter than it is that it looks nice, but it doesn't hurt to make it look nice. And I think that is something that can also help integrate larger projects that we do need throughout the city into our landscape, where you look at the Jolly Roger especially, which is in the Greensboro in your example, that looks like anywhere. It looks like a Hotel Marriott. It looks like it could be on the suburb of any large city throughout the Southeast. And I think we can tailor our, manage the requirements that we give to developers and understand the costs that they have to create these buildings, so that when we talk about neighborhood character, it's not a dog whistle, but it's actually a, hey, maybe if it looks like it belongs in Charlottesville specifically, it will help blend into the neighborhoods and the communities in a way that's not as offensive. That is, again, not the number one concern, because again, shelter is more important than aesthetics, but I think it could help kind of keep Charlottesville. I think something that, you know, we've had a lot of conversations internally about where we're interested in being flexible, or where we can easily see something adjusted. And one of those is the radius that's in here. I know that 0.5 miles, it's the easy walkable distance. But it also is, about half of it is not even in the city. We don't have control over that. So that's the first problem. I think we can be more specific with regards to the land we actually do have jurisdiction over. And then there are areas, especially specifically kind of the Ivy corridor, JPA, that are already so heavily focused on student housing that we can shift it to those more concentrated areas and also let them go as high as they want. So we do get that dense benefit without affecting folks who might not necessarily be affiliated with the university. And I think that's something we're all kind of leaning towards getting on board with. Hang on, I lost my list. You mentioned that there's about 17,000 students at the moment. Do we have information about like the rate of growth and change? Like how recently, like was it, 17,000 students that need off-grounds housing. I meant 27,000 students for UVA enrollment.
Right.
So, you know, they are growing, but are they growing a lot? Are they growing a little bit? Is that accumulated over how many years?
Yeah.
Since like,
That's a good question.
yeah, because I think that's good to know. If we look around and we're like, suddenly there seems like a lot of students is different than this is a deferred maintenance problem.
Right. I think that's a good question to understand the rate of change in enrollment. It's not information that I have access to at the moment. But I agree, it would be helpful to have a sense of, you know, what the university projects in terms of change in enrollment over time.
Yeah.
The university has told us that they have no plans to grow between now and 2030. Now, my past experience with them when they say they have no plans to grow does not mean they won't grow. It's just they're not going to
Public
plan
plans.
to. And historically, UVA, since about 1970, has grown at the rate of a little over 1% a year, year over year over year over year. Some years as much as 1.25%, but it's been a pretty steady growth. When they say they don't plan on adding any more students, but then they add the School of Data Science,
Right.
how do you square those two things? So my sense of things is that we ought to assume that the university will continue to grow at 1% a year. And if by some chance they don't, for some reason, maybe that's a good thing, but that we should be planning as though we are going to have to accommodate an extra, that would amount to about 270 students a year at the current 27,000.
Yes,
And I
a
think
safe
that's
assumption.
that's a reasonable assumption. The reason why I bring it up is because it seems like a lot is happening. Like, it seems like so much. You know, the Verve is big, Bloom is tall, UVA's building a lot of units, but in the analysis you gave us, it's really only 3,500 beds. So that leaves 13,500 people who are still out there competing for the same homes that long-term residents would like to live in. And when people say, well, UVA should house their students, sure, totally, but I would support that if they didn't buy any more land in order to do that.
Right.
Every time they purchase land, it comes off of our tax rolls and limits our ability to spend money on our own residents, which we like to do, and people like to get money spent on them, but that's things like parks and transit and snow plows and things like that.
Just
So,
speaking for this next week.
yeah, everybody get your supplies. But so it might seem like a lot is happening, but there's still a lot of people out there, and if we add a couple hundred people every year, we still have a lot that we need to allow to be built. And then, of course, it's not just incoming people that are coming to Charlottesville for school, but it's also students who like to stick around after they graduate. Those folks also need somewhere to live. We like the fact that you like Charlottesville, great. But if we don't allow additional units and homes, then you are competing with people who do live here, or trying to, you know, maybe someone who grew up living in their parents' house, now old enough to want to move out. You're fighting for the same space that they are, and so if there's more opportunities for more people, then that displacement pressures are reduced as well. We were talking about in lieu fees and whether or not that is something worth adjusting, but then also we've got the tax abatement study coming into place, and perhaps in lieu fees are not the best way that we decide we want to do inclusionary zoning at all. I'm open to that idea, considering that the in lieu fee itself is not building costs. It's just an extra chunk of money that the developers then need to pay the city. And they're not taking that out of their bank accounts. They're adding it to the rent for the people coming in, which means market rates are automatically driven higher because of a number that we've given them. So when market rates are driven up higher, that has that cascading effect towards the surrounding area. That's one thing. The way that companies could also save money is by building a crappier building, which is not good for the people who are going to have to live in it, or if that means that they're saving money by doing concrete board siding, cement board siding instead of bricks to match, you know, Charlottesville. That's also kind of negatively affecting the community at large. It's also not a reliable revenue source. It depends on what's coming down the pipeline for building. And then the last thing about it that's kind of problematic is it concentrates wealth discrepancies. So if I'm building a unit here, and instead of having low-income units in that building, I pay towards the in lieu fee, which, great, sure, fine, we'll take the money if that's the system we have set up, and then we use that towards specifically concentrated areas of low income, that kind of economic integration, it doesn't happen. Whereas if those folks were able to live in that building, then they're able to have that mixed income situation. And if that building happens to be next to a neighborhood that is low income, well, then it's for that neighborhood too, because those folks can help move in there. So building the units in the building is something that I think we can incentivize by the tax abatement where, whether or not we abate the specifically low-income units or the whole building, or I don't know how that math is gonna work out, but it's going to kind of be a little more consistent. It's going to get the units in the building, which is what our stated goal is. Right now, we have a putative system where if your in lieu payment is so high, it's going to want you to build the units in the building, but we don't know if that's actually going to work out, or is that going to prevent development at all? Whereas tax abatement, I think, is more of an incentive. Again, I don't want to force a concentration of high and low income in special pockets. I think we should be able to have integrated incomes throughout the city, and which is to give credit to Ashley, social determinant of health situation. Units in the building help in a much different way than in lieu payments. The other thing is there's a lot of attractiveness to these neighborhoods, 10th and Page, Fifeville, and the neighborhoods surrounding them, not because they're historically underinvested, so more affordable, but straight up because they're in a good location. It's convenient to get downtown, to West Main, to parks and pools, and UVA if you work there. That's kind of the central hub of cool stuff to do in Charlottesville. And there's the way where you can say, we have to stagnate that. Or you can say, we can expand where cool stuff is in Charlottesville also to alleviate some of that pressure on these lower income neighborhoods, which is beyond the scope of this study, but is on the work plan, which is mixed use commercial throughout Charlottesville. If being convenient to like walk to a coffee shop and restaurants is only possible if you live in Fifeville, 10th and Page, north downtown, and like right around Belmont, well, what if that expanded throughout the city and then more people had attractive neighborhoods to live in for that walkability commercial reasons? And this is not a vape shop on every corner. This is coffee shops and little offices and that sort of thing. So I think that's something that is helpful in a secondary effect way to discuss protecting these neighborhoods from demand, is making them not the only good places to live. Expand the amenities that exist in neighborhoods throughout the city. The other thing is core neighborhood overlays that claim to protect existing and historical conditions also can end up handicapping the ability of existing residents, if they own their homes in these neighborhoods, to generate more wealth for themselves. If you're not allowed to build an ADU, if you're not allowed to convert it into a duplex, if you're not allowed to do that stuff in the interest of preservation, well, then you're not able to build that wealth, to add that tenant to help pay for whatever. We can't just say you can't do stuff. But it also would be helpful if, a solution is not just saying these are protected neighborhoods, but how do we help engage with these communities to allow that wealth development, whether that's providing loans at low interest or having standard plans for ADUs to help people in these neighborhoods get those off the ground so that they can stay and have a second unit to help pay for things, or to have, grandma move in or the kids stay there. Whatever, we have to not just lock neighborhoods in amber, but give people strategies to make it workable to live and stay in their neighborhoods. And then it's also true, something we have to think about, which is these big projects citywide help add juice to our tax base, which we desperately need. We got another presentation from our financial team last week. Our tax stress level is high. Our expected revenues are shrinking. The economy is in jeopardy on a big scale. All of these things mean that if we don't allow outside money to help fund our stuff, that stuff is not going to be funded. We don't want to have to take money from schools. We don't want to have to take money from parks, from future development plans. So a necessary thing that we have to do in order to pay for all the stuff that we want, which includes subsidies for housing. It includes transit expansion of drivers and access is to spread out that tax obligation to more people, to more outside money especially. We would love to subsidize a lot of things. Subsidizing doesn't add more opportunity, and it also costs money. So add more opportunity, I mean by add more units. When there's a wait list of people needing somewhere to live, if you give folks subsidies, that doesn't create more places for them to live, so the line is still going to be long. All that is to say, there is room to shift where these especially, I'm going to call them, we could call them roommate units, because you're renting by the bedroom, where, maybe it's more attractive to students, but also other people. Shift those closer to UVA in a more specific way, down JPA and that sort of thing. But we also have to allow development across the city. And if we do it in a way that brings low-income units into those buildings, they will contribute more to the existing neighborhoods that are already there. Thank you.
Jen?
I'm ready. Thank you. And thanks for all of you being so clear and explaining your positions and interesting ideas. I think to answer your question, yes, I would like to see the 4-bedroom scenario charted out. That does seem to be on par with what we're seeing, just for the sake of having all the information for an informed decision. I think we all sound like we're in agreement for what I might call an overlay district of student housing, which is located where student housing is now. I think that seems like a win-win for both developers, students, and UVA Health employees and other people who need a roommate situation to live, and there's opportunity in those neighborhoods to expand without causing harm, and in fact to support what the user's needs. So please do keep doing that kind of research on that. I also would like to see, I am interested in suggestions from the BAR perspective, kind of what Michael was saying. It would be interesting to see how that would play out, because what I'm learning here and hearing is we should have a both-and solution. We should have a solution that protects and repairs our core neighborhoods and our relationship to core neighborhoods as a city and as a provider of access to housing, and slow down our scarcity problem. And both and means that it's done in tandem. So I would like to see what we can do in tandem. Can we move student housing, for example, to an overlay district that seems protective of core neighborhoods, and at the same time funnel the current in lieu fees directly back into supporting anti-displacement measures in core neighborhoods as a requirement of student housing. A both and would be, can we keep vicinities of core neighborhoods supported by current development and still incentivize development that has, right now it seems like we're only incentivizing student housing. We're kind of seeing where it's fallen out in the code now, and we'll have to deal with that now, and that will be uncomfortable, and we will have to do that which we do not prefer. But in moving forward, can there be the use of the tools we have, the tax abatement to encourage more on-site housing for students as well, for the opportunities where the blind spots are for us to step in and say, we're going to continue the support of our neighborhoods, both on the commercial aspect, I think, and the residential with the code, and keep development on the radars of those that can accomplish it in a way that supports all levels of housing, also supporting core neighborhoods. I think there's a great value for Charlottesville and being such a tiny, tiny place to become less segregated and more integrated socially, culturally, and financially, economically. And the system is broken now, but that's where government should step in to fix the system. And we have, I think, more opportunity than hurdle here if we think more both and. So the only concrete things I gave you was fourth, tax abatement as a tool, use the in lieu now. Oh, and one thing, I'd love to see a calibration plan. So I think in the cities where this does work well, there is a regular, and I think you said every year you need to look at the work plan, but in the zoning code, since it can't do everything and we need to support it with this direction of funding and resources, a recalibrating of how the code is working or how the rates of, if we decide to go in lieu are used, or the on-site units, because we don't know what's going to happen with the students or growth, or we can't predict the future. But if we don't recalibrate, we'll have huge gaps of time where we're not making progress, or we're running out of resources to make progress in core neighborhoods, and I want to avoid that. And so seeing where that calibration can play into the plan. Is that,
May I ask one clarifying
Yes,
question, actually?
yeah.
So you mentioned something about potentially creating an overlay district for student housing.
I may be using the wrong nomenclature.
Well, I was wondering if you could clarify what you would see as the goals of the creation of that district.
The goals are to increase housing for the demand of that specific district. So I'm going to call it a UVA serving district. And that would allow, that overlay would be specific geography, JPA, stadium, et cetera, that is supporting that is truly supporting the housing scarcity problem that folks working and going to school at UVA see, and where the taxes or the in lieu fee or the whatever organization we make also serve our core neighborhoods and our lowest income, hardest to get housing folks. Is that a goal, or is that too lofty a goal?
No, I think that was helpful clarification. I think there are tools that we could add to our toolbox to help incentivize the production of additional student housing units. What I just was concerned about was the question of restricting student housing in certain places, and that's not a tool that we can add to our zoning toolbox. We allow housing everywhere in the city as a by right use. Student housing is an example of housing. So I just wanted to make sure I understood what you viewed as the goals of that district. And that does make sense, and I think that's something we can certainly look into in more detail.
So may I ask one more thing back to that? So clarifying on top of your clarifying.
Yes.
We can't say you may not have single room occupancy apartments in a core overlay? Is that what you're saying? We can only say, or?
Well,
I think,
we could, but I think that would be a much larger policy question. I mean, and that's kind of a question of unintended consequences. Right now, any sort of housing is allowed anywhere in the city, and that is consistent with our comp plan goals to produce a wide variety of housing types, across the spectrum. The way so that is just a fundamental baseline, right. If we wanted to restrict housing that you couldn't develop products by, that were rented out by the bedroom, that would have the potentially unintended consequence of restricting other sort of housing that we, need in this market. And you can't control whether students live in that sort of housing or not. That's not something that is an enforceable action, and I think it is a much larger policy question.
Right, so not so much concerned about who is in the building, but where that building is preferred at whatever height.
I think
I'm not being.
what you were
I'm
trying to
getting
say was, by overlay district was, this is where we would like to incentivize student housing.
That is something we can
not where
definitely
would we
look
like
at.
to prevent.
Yes. And there are tools
anything.
that we can add to the toolbox to support that.
I think we need, I'm wrestling with what I'm hearing.
Okay.
So I guess that's a question. but I'd rather you go first.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be last. But I wasn't sure, and I wasn't sure if, are you asking for the ability to limit, or are you asking for the ability to incentivize so that the choice will get made to go to this area and only this area, or primarily this area?
I want to know what's possible, so broad stroke first.
Yeah.
If I would like to, whatever housing is built near core neighborhoods, I want it to be incentivized to serve the core neighborhoods and their overlay and bring in all that
Well,
stuff.
in the
So-
vein of the both and, I mean, I think there is also more work to be done in this space of supporting wealth creation. So no matter
Yes.
what sort of housing is built, there are benefits for the residents that would like to continue to live there. So I view that as a potential approach to continuing to explore opportunities moving forward.
Yeah, that for sure. Your part, I need to think on.
Yeah.
Juan?
So, Natalie,
I just wanted
before I
to
chime
say
in.
one more thing, which is, for the last couple of years, we've heard a lot about the need for more and better community engagement. And one of the tools the city just got, and I think needs to shout from the rooftops a little bit more, is Connect Charlottesville, which you mentioned, thank you. But if everyone pulls out their phone right now and does connect.charlottesville.gov, you'll see a bunch of information and resources, and this is going to be kind of the hub of community engagement moving forward. So bookmark it, visit it, send it to your networks and friends, just so that it's something that becomes kind of a reflex. When you need to know something, or when you hear us say, and that'll be on Connect Charlottesville, you know what we're talking about. All right,
Yeah.
thank you. Just
Yeah.
wanted to plug that real quick.
So I just want to chime in that, as I'm hearing my colleagues and the residents over the last, couple of years in particular, I realized that, as a grad student here a long time ago, I was part of the problem that we're talking about. I lived in Fifield on Cherry Avenue in the house right behind the corner restaurant. I was there with, 3 or 4 other guys. They were in the Darden School, the E School. And I know, now that probably the 4 of us probably rented the house for way more than they could have rented it for to a family. I didn't think about that. I was trying to find a place. I was living in Richmond, trying to find a place to live. As we are trying, and at the time, I remember some of the discussions in the Cavalier Daily, and I think was another newspaper as well, that there were complaints because the food delivery places, there wasn't but a few that delivered then, they would not deliver to Fifield and 10th and Page because, quote, they were the bad neighborhoods. My, have times changed, and I went to school at 88 to 9. It was a few years ago, but it wasn't like I went to grad school with Thomas Jefferson. It wasn't like that long ago. And
You spoke very highly.
yes. And so, a lot has changed. It's a lot more pressure on those neighborhoods than we had before, than there were before. When we were discussing it, and it was like when I first got on council, it was like a water hose coming, because there had already been years and years of discussion on the zoning ordinance change, and there was some discussions on specifically these neighborhoods. And I remember there was some discussion that, about the homes being changed to McMansions there, and it was like, should we limit the number of the costs that one could sell their house for? And I was like, no, I was definitely against that. I was like, if someone lived in that neighborhood for years and they had the opportunity to make generational change money off of that, I didn't want to deny that because that's what other people do. I didn't want to do that. And we made, as I recall, Lloyd and Michael, you were on council then, and Natalie, you were in the audience for a lot of this. But, we said that, we didn't want to rush to make a decision on these neighborhoods, and we were going to wait to to study them in a more deliberate manner and have public input in these neighborhoods and see what, what the zoning impact would be. And that is that's what I want to know, like, is that what you're referring to, like, is the tier 1 and 2 and 3? As far as the neighborhood, I just need to be reminded of this.
Yeah, so Tier 1 and Tier 2 and Tier 3 are terms that we've used to try to describe the different types of development code amendments that we anticipate bringing forward. So I'm channeling my colleague. Tier 1 is like an oil change. Tier 2 is like maybe you need to get your brakes replaced, and Tier 3 is like the engine has fallen out of the bottom of the car and you need to really figure out whether or not you want to buy a new car or replace it, et cetera. So
Level of complexity.
level of complexity is an easier way of, yes, explaining that. So I did hear a couple of references to moving certain items up to Tier 1 on our work plan, and I didn't completely follow. I assumed that what that meant was just finding a way to prioritize studies that address those questions on our work plan, and that's certainly something that we can and we will look at as we look into, now we're going to be wrapping up fiscal year 26 here shortly and looking into fiscal year 27, what we want to tackle.
So I think that, we always, at least I always believe that, we believe that we were doing the best thing with the zoning ordinance. We knew that there would be some impacts, we would have to go back and make some changes. And I would like to elevate, the studies of the neighborhoods as soon as we can, as soon as possible. That's what I would be in the camp of doing as soon as possible, so we'd know what we're talking about. When, all these questions, I think a lot of them will be aligned. It's like if we knew some of the answers to that. So, and I know that you came to us, I don't know, a year and a half ago. This was, I'm not sure if some of these other projects that we were, considering now was even on the radar, but now we're starting seeing some, of the projects that that the zoning ordinance envisions, kind of hitting the road, and we wanted to know, the long-term impacts of some of those. So that being said, Sam, did you want to kind of?
I've got one more question, if
okay.
you don't mind.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we're talking about is this housing geared towards students in UVA. And because there's the incentives for it, in a sense, there's the radius, the in-lieu fees lower, all of that. Do we have, and you might not know this off the top of your head, I'm sorry, I should have sent an email asking earlier. Do we know how many buildings of this scale are proposed that are not geared towards students? Are our regular apartment incentives regular apartment rules constricting supply?
So right now, there are no other large-scale applications under review. And so that is part of the scope of work for this effort, is to look at the in-lieu fees for residential development that's not geared towards students, to ask that question. If our expectation for in-lieu fees are really right-sized and appropriately balance the desire for on-site units with development feasibility.
Yeah, because that would help alleviate, if someone says, I'm a developer, I'll build whatever, makes the most sense, then our structure is sending them to build these units in these neighborhoods when we really want large-scale apartment buildings across the city.
Right. Go ahead, you probably are going to say the same thing about me about the market conditions.
Yeah, I would just, recall the city had an economic analysis done which showed that with or without inclusionary zoning, above 6 or more stories was not feasible anywhere in the city except for student housing, because it simply did not clear hurdle rates for the internal rate of return being high enough, because investors need a high enough profit to make the investment. And
was tax abatement factored into those?
No, but in the recent, that was the economic analysis done, and in the recent tax abatement analysis, the preliminary findings were still that even with the tax abatement, most projects, except for student housing, still can't clear that required internal rate of return that investors need. And, I mean, I'll just
That's
return.
projects over 5 stories.
Correct, because the construction materials have to change, which can double construction costs per square foot. And I'll just return to this point. I think height to me is important because of the economic impact. Again, in that analysis, it was very explicit. 6 stories and above in our market means student housing. So that to me is why the height threshold is relevant, and height is also relevant because the construction costs going up per square foot means that rents have to be higher, which if that happens in Ivy Road, no negative trade-offs, and there are many positive benefits. But again, if that's happening in 10th and Page, I think we are increasing displacement risks.
Well,
And these-
means single-bedroom rentals, not necessarily student housing.
Well, for anything of that scale, if you're talking, 6 stories and above next to working-class neighborhoods, I mean, you're increasing land values, speculation, and also bringing in businesses that are going to, example, the laundromat becomes a pressed juice bar, that kind of change. And I'll just return to that, and that to me, the height is so important because of the economic implications of it. And what new market rate supply will do is, again, lower the annual rate at which rents increase. So you're talking about, instead of your rent going up 8% on average, it goes up 5% over 10, 20, 30 years. That compounds and has a huge positive impact. But it means if you can't afford housing today, you are not going to get increased housing options. So if we're increasing displacement within a neighborhood, what I worry is people have talked about, the K-shaped recovery in the economy. A similar thing will happen with affordability impacts, where housing options increase for the top 20%, but within that neighborhood, working class people are pushed out. And I just really worry that race matters, capitalism matters. We have to incorporate that into how we're thinking about these decisions. And if we're not intentional, I do think the default is, because 10th and Page and Fifeville are so close to UVA, the default is those neighborhoods will become playgrounds for upwardly mobile professionals. And I deeply, deeply worry that a default outcome in our market is housing options for young professionals increase, and the people who work in the hospital for the city live in Buckingham, Greene, Fluvanna, and anyway. And there's a lot in this, but I think one of the things is, if we don't give direction to staff, then at least we want to explore increasing a core neighborhood overlay and examining the role of the BAR. What that means is that we are telling staff the status quo right now we're fine with. 7 to 11 stories of student housing in 10th and Page, Fifeville, Rose Hill, we're fine with that continuing. So
I will say that is a perfect segue into my comments, because that's exactly what I was going to say. I have taken notes. I have highlighted what I capture to be zoning-specific matters, and I'm hoping that Ms. Brown and Mr. Freese will confirm what they heard, because I'm looking for direction. This conversation is based on the idea that you would engage in conversation about student housing, and then you would give staff direction on what you want us to do. I heard an overlay district for student housing. I'm not sure we know how to do that. I'm reading her mind at this moment. I heard we want to move the overlay district conversation in regards to the sensitive neighborhoods forward on the timeline, on the work plan timeline. And I want to make sure that those are two distinct actions. They're not the same thing, because I want to make sure we're not conflating the issue. I heard that we are interested in looking at BAR oversight being revisited. I guess the manner in which they do their work and what powers they're given, I guess, is part of that. I heard that it is important for us to try our best to see if we can update what is the rate of growth for the university, knowing that they may or may not provide the information. But if we can't get that, then we base the rate of change at 1%. And I also heard references to, so I'm looking to see if there was anything else, that there's an expression of an overlay district for student housing being centered around the JPA Stadium Avenue area, which is necessary for the larger public to understand and hear as well. If those are the sentiments, then while you're not able to vote in this session, I just need indication of at least the confirmation of those things, because then we need to figure out how we reorient to be able to deliver on, if this is a set of priorities that you want to see results on, that we can reasonably bring that back to you on some schedule.
So,
And can I just confirm, does that track with where you were and what you heard? Because I'm doing this for you, actually.
Well, thank you very much for summarizing that. I mean, we presented to you, I think, a scope of work for how to look at student housing within the context of in lieu fee expectations. And I didn't hear any feedback that would diminish the importance of doing that study. And I think, Councilor Fleischer, you identified a couple of specific areas of study that would be good for us to continue to pursue, exploring opportunities to help target student housing within a much more focused area around the university that could potentially address some of the concerns about displacement in core neighborhoods is something we can certainly look at. I'm trying to remember everything else that was on your list.
so, yeah.
I think I also heard the importance of looking at opportunities for wealth creation, how to really capture the benefits of new development and target that into the communities that really seek to potentially be burdened and could benefit. I think that's an area where we can definitely do some additional work and look how that can be addressed in our small area plans or in citywide policy studies.
And other programming.
The other items that you listed, maybe you could say them again, or I could just...
So, yeah, what I would like, before we get too far away from what Sam and you are summarizing, is to make sure, I would like to get from the counselors, if they heard what they said, to make sure
Right.
that he captured. So if we could just kind of be succinct as we go down and say yes or no, or so if we could do that, that would be great. Okay, so Michael, did you hear?
I'll be succinct. I would say no, because I think it should also include exploring the process of a zoning text amendment related to core neighborhood overlay, BAR issue in the radius, recognizing that's not binding us to decision, but is the actual process to actually make a change.
So ZTA, and that's something, that, we can discuss, but that's part of it, ZTA. Anything else, Michael? Okay.
No.
Okay. Natalie?
Was that not, my impression is that's
That
what you
was
had
it.
said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I think I don't know if I know that we're trying to keep a manageable scope, but just keeping in mind how it's related to the tax abatement study and the mixed-use commercial as well, and whether or not in conjunction with this study, those get scooted up a little earlier.
That's really what I want clarification on, because the work plan, the effort put into the work plan was to order the steps of all the many
And so
aspects of the work.
maybe I can just help to focus the discussion here a
Yeah.
little bit. The consideration of a zoning text amendment that would introduce an expansion of the core neighborhood overlay would be something that required comprehensive study, and it would need to take place over a long term. It's not something that could be considered immediately, and we would need to develop a scope of work. We would have to look at the legal, potential legal ramifications of essentially downzoning what is currently allowed by right to lower heights. and, what kind of the parameters are for that sort of consideration. But in any circumstance, that is a long-range comprehensive study that would need to be undertaken, and it would certainly supersede or replace other items that are on the work plan. I would also need to understand if that's really the interest of all of you to even go back and scope that work, because it would take time away from other initiatives.
Well, I would just say, I think the issue is if we don't do that, or just so the community understands it, if we don't do that, what our decision is the status quo right now we're fine with, and we are happy for it to continue. And I know this is a different situation, but, we have done zoning text amendments in the past that proceeded in a matter of weeks to facilitate the, I believe, 2117 Ivy Road project. I know a different context, but.
That's not really my understanding of what is possible. My understanding is we could change the half-mile radius without changing the core neighborhood zoning.
Certainly,
right?
those are two entirely different questions.
So the status quo is flexible without that whole process.
So you could pursue a zoning text amendment for any number of changes to the zoning ordinance. Adjusting the radius so that it is more focused and more targeted is within the scope of work for the study that I presented to you tonight.
That's
and
less
something
onerous
that
than
we are
the other thing.
able to bring forward within the next few months. If there is even still a need for a radius to distinguish where we have expectations for an in lieu fee requirement for student housing that is lower than the expectation for non-student housing, we may decide that it doesn't make sense for there to be any difference in the in lieu fee expectation, in which case the need for a radius goes away. You would only want the designation of a specific district if perhaps you wanted to consider some incentives, such as in a very focused area to try to help really steer the student housing to a much more targeted area around the university.
So,
I don't know if that helps clarify
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. It did.
A zoning text amendment that looks at the core neighborhood overlay district that effectively reduces by right height that's allowed, that would be something that would need much more comprehensive study, and staff would need to develop a scope of work and bring forward some considerations for the legal ramifications of that sort of a downzoning decision by council.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Mm-hmm. Lloyd, did you hear your concerns with Sam's summary, Sam and Kelly's summary?
Somewhat. I want to add just a couple of thoughts, things that came along the way. One is, we have to remember, if we're talking about trying to concentrate student housing in JPA, that's already 95% student housing. And the difference is that we would be increasing the density of that housing, but we would also be changing the market and the options, and people who are currently living in some of those small houses would decide to move into other neighborhoods if they were not given that opportunity. So it's not a cost-free proposition. I also note that at least a couple of years ago, 10 of the 11 largest payers of property taxes in Charlottesville were owners and providers of student housing. The one exception was Barracks Road Shopping Center. The other 10 were all folks who are landlords. And the point being that if we end up making major changes in some of these other regards, and I suspect by now, if we had the owners of the Verve and the owner of the Bloom, they would probably now be 12 of the top 13. But that our overall economic health is important, and it's important that our overall housing market basically be in some kind of equilibrium, as getting back to my original thoughts. And I would really like to know more about what that equilibrium might look like and how we would recognize it if we got to that point.
So the equilibrium of the,
In the rental market.
in the real market?
I mean,
Okay. So-
the information we've got is that rental markets, that rentals near the university are, the market's still strong. That you go more than half a mile or so away and the market is now weaker. I don't know what that means as a practical matter, either for the students or for the sort of the ebb and flow of the student market. I am concerned that, I mean, it's not in Charlottesville's best interests to have a lot of hulks of apartment buildings that aren't working. It's not our job to make them work, but I think it is our job to have in mind that as a potential bad consequence.
What's your other item?
The other point is that if we're talking about going back to giving the BAR a lot more power over such things, you may remember that part of what we were trying to do a few years ago was to remove that kind of discretionary review because it was getting in the way of building more units. And so we took that power away from the Planning Commission and we took it away from City Council to, and basically said to the BAR, and we're not going to allow you to regulate size either. And now we're left to the situation where the only thing BAR can look at on the 7th Street project is these two little houses and whether they are individually protected properties and whether we have to put a whole lot of other things on top of that decision in order to get
Okay.
to where people want us to get. And I think that's a problematic area too.
Okay. Jen, did you hear your?
Yeah, I think we've put everything now onto the list.
Yeah.
And I would like to just clarify that it's not necessarily give the BAR more power is what we're looking at, but just looking at the BAR and analyzing if there's things that need to be tweaked.
I have a dumb question. Is, in thinking about the study and the work that you would have to do to look at the core overlay, is it less study to find out like what kind of, how creative we can get with, instead of looking at what can be done to, what, I want to know what protects core neighborhood growth and thriving. I want core neighborhoods to be our healthiest neighborhoods. How do we get there? Is, if that's investment, is there any way to look at incentivizing that investment in development?
You're asking, is there a way to look at whether we can do a better job of capturing the investment, capturing the revenue associated with that new investment and directing it toward the communities that are potentially burdened?
Not just directing it, like, can we go big? Can the tent be really broad? Like, is there a way in this kind of zoning or looking at how,
Yeah.
we're very much limiting our conversation to height.
It doesn't necessarily need to be a zoning tool. We
Okay.
could be looking at things like tax increment financing districts, tax abatement, again. I mean, those are policies that we could establish that could be targeted toward, any number of types of projects. We could develop the criteria. So those are certainly things that we can look at that don't need to start to question the land use vision that the council adopted for maximum building heights.
And
different areas.
prioritization, like, can that also be part of that that discovery?
Prioritization of what?
There's an incentive for developers to prioritize engagement and builds in that core neighborhoods, that help core
We can look
neighborhoods
at that,
thrive
yes.
to,
We
okay.
can certainly look at that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Both hands.
And I know where I was just, again, I mean, one of my core concerns is you have 11 stories with unlimited density allowed by right next to our largest public housing site, which directly interferes with plans they spent years developing, and data and research strongly suggests will have a fundamental economic disruption in the neighborhood, and we have no process for their voice to be heard in a way that actually matters. And to be doing that in the same place urban renewal happened, I just do not think it's right.
Sam,
I'm done.
You got it.
Okay.
Kelly, you have anything else?
Thank you so much.
Nope, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very
And
much.
did you?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
I'm
Mr.
sorry,
King.
No. Thank everyone, and, the public, for your comments and your emails and coming out. It makes a difference. We're listening. And thank staff for this. We're now going to go, do we have closed session
Yes.
today?
Yes.
Okay.
I got it.
So if you can read us into closed session,
Sure.
please.
Pursuant to Section 2.3712 of the Virginia Code, I move that this city council close this open meeting and convene in a closed session as authorized by the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as follows. 1, pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A1 for discussion and consideration of prospective candidates to be appointed to the following boards and/or committees: Police Citizen Oversight Board and Council Finance Committee. 2, pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A1 for consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically contemplated counsel action with respect to federal immigration enforcement.
Just a correction, Police Civilian Oversight Board.
Thank you. I thought it sounded weird. I appreciate it. Police Civilian Oversight Board.
Okay. Can I get a second, please?
Second?
All in favor, please say yes.
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 All opposed, please say no. Thank you. We'll be back at 6:30 or maybe a little after. So thank you.